Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to go over how to hand plane the bullnose edge on the top and bottom of the box. I want to briefly go over hand planes. You can find more information about hand planes, more in-depth information on some of our videos that we focus more on just planes and how they're used and the different parts of them, how they're set up and such. My go-to plane is a Stanley model number 4.5. I like the plane because it's a smoothing plane. It's used for smoothing your stock. It's comfortable to hold. It's a nice size. It's also a little wider than, say, a number 4. A number 4 is a little narrower. However, it's difficult to find a good Stanley number 4.5. I got this one on the used market and was lucky to find this one. And you can find them, but oftentimes they need a fair amount of work. Lie-Nielsen is one maker of a Stanley style 4.5 plane, and I find it to be a wonderful plane. I think what makes a good tool is the sum of all of its parts, and the Lie-Nielsen has machined this plane to perfection. So if you're going to invest in one plane, I highly recommend this one. Of course, Stanley came up with a variety of planes starting from a number 1 and going all the way through to a number 7. Here's a number 5, and as you can see, the numbers really denote just the difference in the size. Of course, the number 6 is a little bigger, number 7, number 8. You start getting smaller, number 3, number 2, number 1. And a lot of these planes were used for preparing your stock, that is surfacing the stock, removing a lot of material, even jointing and edge jointing. And in some of our other videos we go over that whole aspect of how to edge joint your material and such using longer planes. So for now, I'm just going to use my 4.5. Again, this is my go-to plane. I use this for most all of my work. So I've sharpened it up. I have a little bit of a convex shape, very slight convex shape to the blade, and we'll start planing. So the first step here that I want to do with this top and bottom is just to lightly smooth the surface. And I say lightly, it's important here. If we take off too much material, we're going to misshape the wood. So I'm going to start by feeling the blade, and I'm feeling it with my thumb or my finger going across this way, and I just want to make sure that we have the right amount sticking out, that it's not sticking out too far, and that it's also even on both sides. Again, we go into this more in depth on some of our other videos. But if you see here, we can adjust the lateral adjustment. So if I'm getting a deeper cut on one side, I'm going to push the lateral adjustment towards that side. So let's try it. Now I can feel that it's taking off a little bit more than what I want to at the moment, so I'm just going to back the blade off. That is counterclockwise, back it off. And my goal here is, as I've said, this is a smoothing plane, so my goal here is to smooth the material. Lower the bench dog there. My goal is to smooth the material, so I'm not trying to take off a big shaving, but I am trying to take off a very light shaving and just smooth the material. Okay? Another thing that I'm looking at here when I'm planing the surface of this is I'm looking at the grain orientation. Let's get a pencil. If you follow the grain line here, you can see this grain line is working all the way up like this. So I want to plane in this direction. If I plane against the grain, we're going to lift the fibers, and it's not going to work. It'll tear out and such. The other thing is when I hold the plane, I've got one finger out like this. I put pressure on the front of the plane, and as I go over this, I put pressure over the whole of the plane, and as I exit, the pressure is on the back of the plane. Okay, so you can see here, I work it across like this. Occasionally, what's interesting is you'll find the grain lines will follow in one direction, but sometimes you'll find a little bit of tear out. I've got a little bit of tear out there, and I may even have to turn the board around. Sometimes those grain lines can be a little bit deceiving, so you've just turned this around, and sure enough, it's smoother in that direction. So initially there was a little bit of tear out, but I turn it around and it's nice and smooth. You can see the shimmer there as it just glistens. Again, because the surface is planed, there's no scratches in it. In fact, a lot of people think of woodworking, and they often think of sanding their stock, sanding your material, but if you use a sharp plane and sharp chisels and such, you can actually eliminate the need for sandpaper. Maybe not necessarily eliminate it, but reduce it greatly. Maybe even reduce it up to 80%. Because instead of scratching the surface, we're cutting the surface. You'll also hear when I'm smoothing this, it's not making a continuous sound as it goes over that. And that's because what we're doing is we're actually just smoothing this surface. So if I work this along, you'll hear it sometimes. It'll make kind of a skipping sound. And then when I continue, it will make a continuous sound all the way across that surface. So I think we're ready to go on to the shaping aspect of this. And what I want to do is I want to show you how we actually create a bullnose edge on this piece. We're going to do the top. On the top, we're going to do it on 3 sides. And then on the bottom, we'll do it on four sides. So I like to put a couple little layout lines on this, and you can do this with a pencil, just taking the pencil, pressing it between your middle finger and using your middle finger as a guide right here, and we can divide the top of this board into thirds. Okay, so I've got this, we'll just divide it right into thirds like this, and we can carry that line down like this. And again, using my finger there as a guide, the finger's running up against the board, and we'll just mark it. And again, this is just a rough guideline, just a means to help guide you when you're planing this. So I can also take that same setting, if you will, with my finger and my pencil, and just run it also along the face. And what this is doing is it's preparing us to start by putting that bullnose edge on here. Now it might be helpful for me to draw a little illustration to help show you exactly what our goal is and some of the different steps that we'll be taking to reach that goal. So right now we have our board that looks like this. It's square. And our first step is to just take and chamfer the edges. And that's what I've done, is I've drawn the marks. I've divided the top of the board into thirds, and we're going to just chamfer the edge down. After we've chamfered the edge, that is, when I say chamfer, I mean cut the corner off at 45 degrees. So after we've cut it off at 45 degrees, then we can come in here and just take the edges right here off. That is 22.5 degrees. Now you can start seeing a bullnose starting to take shape there. And we'll do that by lessening the cut on the plane. We don't want to bring this over too far, because this round over can interfere with the actual sides of the box if we bring this over too far. So let's begin by doing that here in the vise. Now, if you'll notice, I have this positioned here in the vise with the end grain facing up. The reason why I've got that is because you have to think of wood as a series of all these fibers. I even think of it as straws coming up like this. And it's helpful to work the end grain first, because if we accidentally split out the side right there by working our plane across, we can clean it up by going with the grain. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind though is as I cut this chamfer, I don't want to go straight like this, because if I go straight like this, I could blow this part out right there. What I want to do is I actually want to shear the fibers like this, and this might be best illustrated using a chisel. If I take a chisel here, and I take this chisel across the grain like this, and I keep it going. This is a nice sharp chisel, but if you'll notice, if I come right out there, it's going to break out the edge. Now, if I simply take the chisel and take it down like this and work it across, we're shearing the cut, and we can work off the edge without breaking it off. So you'll notice, again, I'm still going at 45 degrees, but I'm working it like this, shearing it as we go across, as opposed to going straight in like this. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind here is, again, here we have all these straws going up like this. If I go against the grain like this, what's going to happen is, you can see it just doesn't want to cut because we're going against those fibers. You see how they're all kind of chipping out like this? I'm going to end up ruining my top here, but I want you to understand this. In the exact same way, you don't want to do that with the plane. You don't want to go back like this. A plane is essentially a holder for a chisel. Okay, so the same technique applies with the plane. So I've got to work up like this. Again, 45 degrees, lower the plane like this, and don't go in the direction of the plane, but actually shear across the grain like this. So we're shearing across the grain. Now, sometimes initially here, you may have to set the plane a little deeper. There's no sense in it being set shallow if you're trying to take off a lot of material. As I get closer to the line here, what I'm going to do is actually back the blade off, because if the blade is set deep, you're going to take off a heavy cut, which you don't want to do. So we're going to back the blade off, take off a lighter cut as we work this along, and you can see we've got a nice chamfer there, a nice 45 degrees on both sides right here. And we're right to our line. We're right to our line there. Now what I'm going to do is, there's a couple things I could do. I could actually go back and do a 45 on all of the edges and then come back and do my 22.5 degree angle. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to back the blade off. So I'm just turning the adjustment screw counterclockwise, and we're going to work the top right here, shearing it, then the bottom right here, just a little bit. Don't take off too much here, just a little. Okay, now we're going to come in here, and you'll notice too, very loose grip on the plane, shearing it across, shearing it all the way, shearing it like this, and then down here, shearing this as well. And there we have it. Now you can see, just by backing the blade off, again, counterclockwise, pulling the blade back, you can see we are taking a very light shaving, and now we've got our roundover right there. We'll do the same thing over here on this other end. Again, doing the ends first, just in case we do have a little breakage there on the sides. That can be taken up later. So I'm going to advance the blade 45 degrees, shearing it across just like this, shearing it right across, creating that 45 degree angle. Then we'll come back this way. You can turn the board around, or you can just come around on the back side like this, shearing it across. You can hear it as it just goes across, just like that. Now I'm going to back the blade off, just back it off slightly and work the top of it. Even more, let's back it off just a little bit more. And then we're going to pull this down, just a little bit there. And then we'll take this top off here. And then lower this down right here like this. There we have it. Now let's work on the long grain. So you can see we've got a nice bull-nosed edge there. Now we'll work on this long grain right here. And again, that's done pretty much the same way. However, with this, I don't have to shear it because I'm not working across that end grain. Here I'm working with the grain. And this is a technique that you can use on all types of applications. If you're trying to chamfer the edge of a board, if you're trying to put a bullnose on a edge of a staircase. I mean, there's so many different applications for this right here. So 45 degrees like this. I can even come back here, 45 degrees like this. There we go. Then we'll back the blade off, just like this, and take the top corner there off, 22.5 degrees, bring it down here, 22.5, and then up here like this, and then just bring it down like this. Okay, I'm going to back the blade off even more. So you can hear the plane is just barely rubbing on the surface. And that's how I can take off a much finer shaving and be able to really refine this bullnose. There we go. You can actually come back and clean this up with a little bit of sandpaper. I've got a little 220 grit sandpaper here. And if you wrap it around like this, it'll form around that curve and it'll even out any of the undulations and the facets that are left from the hand plane and give it a nice, smooth, rounded appearance here. There we go. And you can do the same on all the edges here. Now, what I've done here is I've shaped the top, which the top only has the bullnose on 3 sides. The bottom will have the bullnose on 4 sides. So now I've completed the top, and I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing on the bottom, with the only difference being that I will bullnose all 4 edges here. I'm just doing the final sanding on the bottom here. I've rounded all 4 sides, and I believe we're ready to go. We've got the bottom here, which is rounded on all 4 sides, and the top, which is only rounded on 3 sides. You'll also notice that the top is a little bit narrower, and you can find all the measurements for this in the plans and cut list down below in the resources tab.